right, we're going live in 3, 2, 1.
Hey, we're live, everyone. We'll take a second here while we get everything fired up on Facebook Live and Periscope and all the above to let you know that this is our weekly Zoom Hangout. On this call, we have Robert Cessna of the Eagle. I'm Travis Brown of the Eagle. Good old Alex Miller of the Eagle as well. And Alex, I'm going to go ahead and have you come back online real quick for just a second. Come back, turn your mic on. Because you both are guests this week, our all-important guests. Why don't you introduce our guests for this Alabama game week?
Yeah, so joining us this week on our Aggie Zoom Sports Hangout is Brett Hudson, covers Alabama football for the Tuscaloosa News. Brett, good to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I didn't know that Zoom could do all of this multi-live streaming at the same time. So y'all have figured out the technology a lot better than I have.
We didn't either until, we had way too much time on our hands to sit at home while no sports was happening. Brett, thanks so much for joining us. What's the feeling like out there in Alabama coming off the win that Alabama had, and then looking over here in Aggie Land and seeing that A&M, Kellen Mond, all the rest, I kind of had their hands full with Vanderbilt.
That's a tough scene for sure. Naturally, the feel around Alabama after beating a conference team on the road by 19 points is to complain about the second team offensive line and some of the tackling issues throughout the game. That's just how Alabama and its fan base works. So a 19-point win on the road in the conference just ain't good enough in these parts. But on the whole, I think the performance was about what you would expect of it, or what you would hope of it. You're more or less trying to prevent as much offensive regression as possible as you hand the keys over to Mac Jones, and you're without the two wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs III, who are now first-round draft picks for the Broncos and the Raiders, respectively. You're trying to limit the amount of offensive regression you have because you're so much more experienced on the defensive side, especially in the front where run defense was an issue for them last year. So you're trying to limit the amount of offensive regression you have, and for the offense to perform the way it did in that game against Missouri was encouraging, even if the second offensive line wasn't necessarily up to Alabama's standards.
First of all, it's just nice to talk to somebody that admits they know Alex. But I was wondering, first of all, what kind of atmosphere do you anticipate when you look at people going to Alabama? You said right off the bat they're probably not going to have much of a chance anyway. What's on the field? I'm interested. What do you think is going to happen with the 20% in the stadium fans?
I'm very interested to find out. They did incorporate some students into the number, so I think you're going to get a certain amount of atmosphere from them, since they're the ones that are more likely to be ruckus and make noise than the others. But there's also a lot of high value donors that made that pool that aren't necessarily as likely to be the big noise generators of Bryant-Denny Stadium either. I think the thing that I'm most interested in is walking around the quad on the day of the game, because it's normally filled with tents and there's people tailgating all across campus, and tailgating has been shut down here at Alabama for the season. So that's definitely going to be a different vibe and a different scene. But this is also the first time Alabama's playing in Bryant-Denny Stadium since there was a renovation to it. They brought down the capacity a little bit. It's just over 100,000 now with the new renovation. There's some new student amenities and things like that. It's more geared to the modern day consumer who is not necessarily as thrilled to sit in a sweat box for 3.5 hours with nothing in front of them but that football game. There are more things that go into the atmosphere nowadays, and the renovation to the stadium was supposed to reflect that. So there's a lot of things going on with the stadium that I'm interested to see, but the environment, I assume it's going to be similar to how it's been around the country, where it's what it was, just a lot quieter than it used to be.
You mentioned Mac Jones, the new quarterback. What is the the vibe around him, and it's got to be a tough spot to be in, to be that guy to follow Tua and what he was able to do there, and kind of bring a offensive revival in Alabama.
Right. There's a lot of skepticism about Mac Jones from the fan base anyway, because you have to take what he did last year into certain context. Twice had to come in more or less at halftime for an injured Tua Tagovailoa against Tennessee and Mississippi State. And so throw those two out because he's coming in at halftime. It's not a situation he was necessarily prepared for. You're kind of hesitant to evaluate a person on that. Two of his four starts came against Arkansas and Western Carolina, a just garbage football team, and then an FCS team in Western Carolina. So you don't want to evaluate him on that either. You're more or less left with the Iron Bowl and the Citrus Bowl. And in the Iron Bowl, he threw 2 interceptions that turned into 14 points for Auburn. So in a rivalry game that you lose by 3 points, 2 interceptions that turn into 14 points, that's going to be remembered by the fan base. And there was a not insignificant section of the fan base that thought that the 5-star freshman from California, Bryce Young, would be a better option for the offense than he was. I wasn't in agreement with that because, yes, the 2 interceptions were preventable mistakes, but there were 30-some-odd throws on the road against one of the best defenses in the nation that went pretty well for Mac. Those things happen for a first-year starter in a situation like that, and then he performed pretty well in the Citrus Bowl. So there was some skepticism around Mac, but he has the talent necessary to operate this offense at a high level. He has everything he needs. This offense has to test teams downfield because they have the wide receiver talent to do so, and he has the arm to accurately place the ball 30, 35, 40 yards downfield. He can do that. He's intelligent. He has experience in the offense. I think he's going to run the offense reasonably well. He's not Tua. Almost no one is Tua. He's not going to make some of the throws that Tua could make, but you don't have that guy most years anyway. So I'm anticipating Mac will be a perfectly competent starter, if not kind of surprise some people with some of the numbers he puts up. There may be a time down the road when Bryce Young has more experience in the offense and he's not having to do his offseason during a pandemic, where his just off-the-charts talent combines with knowledge of the scheme and forces Alabama to make a difficult decision about their quarterback. I don't anticipate that happening this year because Mac is perfectly capable of doing everything they need to do offensively.
Brett, if we get back to that defense, you touched on it. Last year on the outside looking in, reading it wasn't a Saban defense. Some people said injuries. I know from watching it, A&M had 389 yards last year, and if it wasn't for kicking game, A&M would have been even a lot closer in that ball game, and A&M really wasn't a great offensive team last year. But everyone said about how much better, what I've read, that this defense is going to be. So what has transpired to think that Alabama will be back to an old, let's say, top 5 defense?
Mostly health. They lost both of their inside linebackers last year to season-ending knee injuries in the preseason, and then they lost, at the time, their second most experienced defensive lineman, now their most experienced defensive lineman, LeBron Ray, to a foot injury in week 3 against South Carolina that kept him out for the rest of the season. So LeBron wasn't on the field when Bama played Texas A&M either. So health contributes a lot. And one of those inside linebackers they got back was Dylan Moses, who's an all-SEC caliber guy in 2018. And had he been healthy last year and repeated what he did in 2018, he very well could have been a first-round draft pick last year. But now he's back, and he makes a big difference because Bama replaced those guys with 2 freshmen. They replaced them with Shane Lee and Christian Harris. And this defense gets dumbed down for no one. They ran the defense the way they draw it up to be ran, and the freshmen they had difficulties communicating it the way it needed to be communicated because it's a lot of information to put on someone who hasn't done it before, and they struggled for those reasons. But with Dylan Moses back, that seems to be getting a lot better, and they played so many freshmen on the defensive line too. There are guys like Byron Young and Justin Aboigbe. Christian Barmore was a redshirt freshman last year. Maybe he'll be healthy in time for this week's game against Texas A&M. There were so many freshmen that gained valuable experience last year. DJ Dale is another one And they anticipate getting some growth in that regard too. Now they have some missing pieces in the secondary last year. They lost 3 of last year's 5 starters there. But the run defense should be significantly improved, both from health, having some of their top players back, and then the experience that the freshmen gained at some of those key positions last year.
Brett, how did Alabama come back from the break that COVID the break that COVID gave everybody, and what has been those kind of COVID procedures as they've moved forward?
Well, they kind of beat their chest about testing daily. They were pretty proud about that. They started that not long before the season started. They felt like that was the most safe thing they could do. And really, Alabama hasn't had a ton of COVID issues. Like, I know A&M lost its best wide receiver to opt out for the season. Alabama really hasn't been hit by a hard opt out. Now, I do think that part of that is it goes back to the guys that are on the team, the guys that came back. They clearly had something to prove. They lost a lot of guys to the draft last year. They lost Ruggs and Judy and Jedrick Wills because those guys didn't have much left to prove. They had done everything they could do in college football. But Alex Leatherwood, who's back on the offensive line, Devontae Smith, who's back at wide receiver, Najee Harris back at running back, some of the guys on defense too, they still had something to prove. So they came back to school for a reason, and they were highly motivated, mostly by potential dollars in the NFL draft, to play this season. They felt like they had more to prove, and they needed to play a season to do that. So Alabama's been pretty lucky in that regard that they haven't been hit with some COVID opt-outs. Now, they've had a couple, but they haven't had any that's had nearly an impact as Jamon Osborne leaving Texas A&M, that's for sure.
Brett, this will be the 3rd time, since Jimbo's come to A&M that he's going to play Nick. Used to work for Nick, and I watched him yesterday. I guess it's so old hat that Saban runs into so many former assistants. That's not even brought up. So you guys just figure this is just another game that, when he plays a former assistant, it's barely a note in you guys' advances.
More.
Looks like we might be experiencing a little technical difficulty here.
Saban didn't like that question.
We'll see. Alex,
wow.
Can you shoot Brett a text and see if we're experiencing some difficulties here? Well, see, we can go in.
I can understand, but this.
See, so we can take a moment here, and we can keep breaking down a little bit of the game coming up. But let's first. I know we talked about last week or after the game on Saturday, kind of how peculiar that game was to watch. How much of a win it didn't feel like. A couple days removed, and as we move on to A&M facing Alabama, what's kind of been your thoughts on that game against Vanderbilt?
Well, Travis, and we talk about this often. The last few weeks, we're talking about Osborne leaving and Hines and how that would affect the team and whatever. Now we're talking about how bad that Vanderbilt game was. Man, A&M needs a good field story. I mean, let's be honest. It's early in the season, and they're going to Alabama where they're 17-point dogs. Even if they'd go down there and play well and lose, I think that would be a positive. They need positives, and Alabama's a tough place to go get positives, but A&M needs positives, and I know Brett hopefully is back with us now. People don't get a lot of positives going to Alabama unless you're Ole Miss, maybe going back to the days in Hugh Freeze, what have you, and Malzahn once in a blue moon. But A&M needs a pick-me-up, and Alabama's season opener is a tough place to get a pick-me-up. Glad you're back, Brett, by the way.
Yes. So to go back to your question about assistants, it happens so often these days. Jeremy Pruitt's at Tennessee, Jimbo's at Texas A&M, Will Muschamp is at South Carolina. There are others sprinkled throughout both the SEC and the prominent programs elsewhere. Billy Napier is at Louisiana Lafayette, for example. Mel Tucker is at Michigan State now. There are just so many that it's not something that hits the radar locally, especially because Saban's undefeated in those games. It'd be one thing if he had taken a lump here or there, but he hadn't lost one yet. It'll be on the radar once he loses one, but it's not right now. And as you kind of just got done hinting at, I doubt this is the one that the one that Saban takes.
Yeah. So
following it up, of course, Kirby's the main one, but what about Kiffin? I mean, come on, Kiffin. Do you think Saban will have a little bit extra for playing Kiffin?
It wouldn't surprise me, given the different terms of the departure between those two. It wouldn't surprise me. That was a weird circumstance. It seems likely that Kiffin will have something extra for Saban, if nothing else, because he knows that's a big statement opportunity for someone who's trying to make a statement and do things a little bit differently at a place like Ole Miss. So that would make sense. I have a question for y'all, actually. To your point about Jimbo needing something positive here, what would be deemed positive? Obviously, a win would be deemed positive, but would a 10-point loss be positive? Would a 14-point loss be positive? What would it take?
I think that it doesn't necessarily have to do – I mean, the score is going to play a big part in it. But going back to what they did against Vanderbilt and going back even to last season, I think that they need to show some continuity on offense. I think Kellen Mond needs to show that he can continue to make strings of good passes and accurate passes, and they can move the chains. And even if they lose, but the offense looks like it's building some momentum, I think that would be a win because there was too much offensive stall-outs and too much offensive inconsistency, and it's what everyone is expecting to be a pretty not great Vanderbilt team here that doesn't point in any direction positively towards this season going well. Cease, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the key word is, and I'll be a typical sports writer, to write some columns once, so I'm being vague. They have to play well. And you think about, 27, was it 18 or 19 a few years ago to Alabama? Cut down the turnovers, don't do something stupid on the kicking games. I mean, right now, you look at what they've done, the 59-0 was down at Alabama. They just have to go play well, because if Alabama plays its A game, A&M could lose by 20, but if they still would play with no turnovers, unless they're at the end trying to do garbage, if they could run for 100 yards, pass for 250, and still lose by 3 touchdowns, but no turnovers, few penalties, people could possibly live with it. Because you see the Vanderbilt game, nothing. There's nothing. You want to talk about the backup, linebacker? They lose Hines, and Hansford comes in and plays well. That just doesn't cut it. All the talk this week is negative. You go into chat rooms, people answer your columns. I go out to eat. People go, what's wrong with the Aggies? You want them to say, like, hey, you want to run into fans. They say, I'm hopeful as Florida comes to town. Right now, there's just not a lot of hopeful. So to answer your question, Brett, I don't think, unless you're bleeding maroon, you're going to think that A&M's going to go down there and win, but maybe they can go
well. The offensive part of that makes all the sense in the world. I actually just looked up this stat before we got on. What I did was I took Jimbo's 17 team at Florida State and the 18 and 19 teams at Texas A&M, and I took the yards per play in all other games other than against Alabama, and then their yards per play against Alabama, because his last team at Florida State played Bama, and then he left for A&M. In those 3 games against Bama, his offense averaged 5.1 yards per play. In every other game of those 3 seasons, it averaged 6 yards per play. So playing Bama has more or less cost Jim Fisher 1 yard per play over the last 3 seasons. And when you factor in that these offenses, even at a slower pace like Jimbo's is, they're running in between 60 and 75 plays a game. That 60 to 75 yards very well could be the difference for A&M fans feeling positive out of a possible, if not likely, L in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Yeah. Brett, from an Alabama perspective, I know we've kind of gotten into this a little bit, but from an Alabama perspective, what is the biggest headline? What is the biggest thing you're looking for in this game from Alabama as they continue on game 2 of the season?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the run game was pretty good against Missouri. The second team offensive line issues notwithstanding. The pass game could have been more explosive, but I don't think that's as much of an issue. I think people are waiting for this secondary to be tested. We mentioned that the run game is expected to be the run defense is expected to be significantly better this year. They were tied for 43rd in the nation last year in yards per carry allowed, but they were one of the best pass defenses in the country last year, and they lost their starting deep safety, actually both of their starting deep safeties and their starting nickel corner. They lost 2 safeties and 1 corner. So they've replaced the corner with Josh Jobe, a immensely talented young cornerback who has yet to prove that he can handle the nuances and the techniques of being a corner. They replaced a deep safety with someone who was a second stringer last year. And they have a freshman at nickel corner, a guy named Malachi Moore, out of the Birmingham area, an incredibly talented player, but he's a true freshman starting in Bama's secondary. It's an inexperienced secondary in a lot of ways, in a lot of aspects, and I think Alabama fans are waiting for that secondary to be tested. Maybe Kellen Mond can do that. I imagine y'all would be more apt to answer that question than I am, but I think Bama wants that secondary to be tested, be it this week or definitely against Ole Miss, because they're going to try some stuff, if nothing else, with Lane as their head coach. But I think people want that secondary to be tested a little bit more than Missouri did.
Brett, other than, we know outside looking in, Jones, Harris, Smith, Waddle, those names come off my fingers just like anyone else. Who's a player or two for Travis and I or the fans to watch that might be a game changer Saturday that we're not familiar with from Alabama?
On the offensive side, I'd say John Mechie III, the number 3 wide receiver. He's somebody who last year probably would have started on at least 110 FBS teams last year. But at Alabama, he was playing behind Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs III, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle. Now those two of those 4 are gone. Mechie has elevated himself to be the number 3 wide receiver, and he performed pretty well against Missouri. So he's someone that you could see, because you can throw all the attention at Devontae Smith because he's one of the best wideouts in the country. You can focus on Jalen Waddle, and you probably should. He's lit Texas A&M up in the last 2 meetings. But if you do all that, you're probably leaving some openings for John Mechie, who's a perfectly capable wide receiver. He's the one on offense, and defensively, frankly, I think Bama's still trying to figure that out. They know they have Patrick Surtain II, one of the best corners in the nation, very likely to be a top 10 or at least first round selection in the upcoming NFL draft, if not top 10. They know they have LaBryan Ray, a proven commodity on the defensive line. They know they have Dylan Moses, an all-SEC caliber inside linebacker. I think they're waiting for a couple playmakers to emerge on the defensive end. That could be Christian Barmore on the defensive line, who missed the Missouri game with a minor knee injury. I anticipate him being back. He showed some pass rush prowess last season in limited roles. Maybe he can step up and be that guy. They have a really promising freshman at outside linebacker, Will Anderson Jr., who I kind of thought was going to see the field immediately in some pass rush packages, but he was your straight up starting outside linebacker for Bama against Missouri. So maybe he blossoms and uses some of those physical gifts early. And there's some other candidates around the field, but I think offensively, John Mechie III is that guy, your number 3 wide receiver. And defensively, I think Bama still wants to figure out who their top 5 playmakers are. They know 3 of them. They're waiting for more to emerge.
Here's something that always fascinates me, even though we're getting more and more into into the days where this is not necessarily a point of conversation. But with A&M still as one of the new kids on the block, how is A&M perceived to the Alabama fan base? Are they a full much part of this conference now because of what they've been able to do and the time that they've been in the conference now? How is the program and the school felt by Alabama fans from your perspective?
I think they think it's a good fit. There are a lot of cultural aspects about Texas A&M that make it fit pretty well with the SEC ethos. It is kind of interesting that Bama's playing the two new additions to the conference in its first 2 weeks of this modified season. I think Alabama fans are far more receptive to A&M being in the league than they are to Missouri being in the league. There are a lot of things about Missouri that really don't make sense in the SEC, except for the fact that they give you a different television market to tap into, and you can kind of increase your financial potential that way. But Texas A&M makes a lot of sense in this league. They invest a lot in football. They're naturally gifted or privileged in that way. They're very, very rich, as all of your listeners know. They have access to talent in the state of Texas. They're good at baseball, which helps a lot. They also bring an equestrian program, which I'm sure Auburn and Kentucky were super thrilled about. But they fit culturally in a lot of ways. If nothing else, it gives Alabama fans an opportunity to get out there and go get some Torchy's tacos or some excellent I know I personally appreciate that. As someone who was at Torchy's Tacos a lot later than I should have been the weekend of that A&M game last year, I certainly appreciate that greatly.
Well, next time you get in town, I mean, Torchy's is good, but we got to point you in the direction of Fuego. Fuego's good tacos.
Look, you're not going to make me say no to a taco. I'm all for it.
Brett, I can tell you, you've done your homework a la Alex. So good stuff. I'm telling you, I feel like I can go right in advance now.
You can. I hope you can.
Exactly. Well, I think that's all we have for you today. Brett, thanks so much for giving us a few minutes of your time, helping us break down this big game this weekend, and hope happy writing.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, and real quick, let you go. How can people find you, contact you, find your work?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Brett_Hudson. I'm on Facebook and Instagram too, and the website is tidesports.com. I've written about screens already because I'm a serious nerd, and I'm about to have a feature on the punter. So I have a problem, and if that's your type thing, it's on tidesports.com.
Cool. All right, Brett. Well, thanks so much. Be sure to check out some of his work, and we'll be back with more Zoom Hangouts for y'all pretty soon. Thanks, everybody.